a male political class. Separate argument. There's a sort of democratic thought, right? A very classically liberal thought which goes...
That's first wave, basically.
Voters, yeah, very first wave. Voters may make what choices they choose.
It's beyond that. If someone thinks that voting for a woman is something bad, and no matter what party he will vote to, he will vote for a woman, then he cannot vote. You take away his choice.
That's the same idea.
So that depends on how you write the, that depends on the definition, right? That depends on how you write the electoral code. The easiest way to guarantee that it's 50% is just to have a political system with constituencies and randomly pick half of them and go, only women can stand in those areas. What would happen if you did, what would happen if the party lists were required to go male, female, male, female, male, female, male, female?
That would be possible.
That would work?
We have one electoral district.
It would get you to 50%. It would get you a lot closer to 50%, because presumably lots of people could vote for the party for which only one person was standing. Yeah? So it doesn't get you to 50%, but it would get you an awful lot closer, right?
If you lose it all, the power of religious parties will drop.
Oh, well, we may have just made religious parties impossible. And if you're on prop, you may say good. You may say it is like, we would never think it acceptable to have an explicitly racist party. Right? We just would not.
We do in Israel.
You have you've got Avigdor Lieberman.
We also have the ultra-Orthodox.
In which case, yeah, okay, so...
But that's proper first wave. They can be religious if they want to have a woman in every second place, but that's exactly the first wave.
You do have to make an explicitly anti-democratic argument, if pushed on this, sooner or later. And you're basically going to be advancing the case for constitutional democracy. You're going to be saying something along the lines of, we don't like democracy because we like democracy, or because we think voting is cool. We like democracy because we think it's the best way in which to create a political system which fulfills the rights of people, its citizens.
Actually, in Swiss, I think that voting
and when it doesn't, we fudge it. Right? When the political system does not, in fact, deliver outcomes which actually fulfill rights, we forget what the vote would be. Or if we prefer, we write a constitution. And it's quite easy to advance an argument over here that goes, rights are more important than votes.
Well, I mean, do you have something to say?
You've forgotten, it's gone, it's gone.
I want to go back to the very, very initial thought when you started this workshop, because we are approaching the end of it.
Are we really? I've got like 1/10 of the way through. Oh
well. I know, but
this
here's
happens.
the thing. This is because it's important. Because you started this discussion saying the fact that saying something is desirable, something is good, something is whatever, does not necessarily mean that it is a right. And here's my point. When do we decide which choices of people or which fundamental interests of people are right? Because I would say, for example, that education is a fundamental interest. Some people differ whether it is a right or not. So I think like taking this back to why are these rights would probably be a good way of...
Oh, I see. So how you choose what ends up in the category. Okay?
Yeah. Like, why would, for example, in this affirmative action case, why would this be a right of women rather than just a nice thing or a beneficial thing for society?
So why it would be a right in this particular instance. There are various generic ways in which you can argue for rights, and if we can bring up my notes, it'll make my life easier. The first way to argue that something is a right is to be a utilitarian, but covertly, right? So some judges will just buy it if you go, the world is a lot better if this right exists, or if we enshrine this right, therefore we should enshrine it as a right. So there you're making an argument that we should enshrine it as a right rather than it is a right. Okay? That's one way of running this argument. Just be quite practical about it and go, the world is better if we enshrine it, therefore we should enshrine it. That's way one. Second way you might do it. Jesus Christ, where did I put them? Oh no. Okay, I can't find it in my notes, so I'll find it later probably. And then kick myself. The second way to do it is to connect it in some way to what you might call, what you could call human flourishing, or people living valuable, fulfilled lives, right? If this is in some way necessary to being able to live a valued, fulfilled, happy life, then you could say you had a fundamental interest in it. If what is fundamental is that humans be fulfilled and happy. If, on the other hand, what is fundamental about humans is that they be free, you could advance the claim that this is necessary in order for human beings to be fully free. Right? Both of those ideas are connected. The idea that it's vital to our fulfillment or our happiness, or the idea that it's vital to our freedom, are connected to the idea that it is fundamental to us being human at all. The point of making a rights argument, because rights arguments are not just kind of like nice things, right arguments are responses to vulgar, people have a right to be tortured. That means come what may. That is a trump.
Not to be tortured.
Not to be tortured. If you genuinely believe that there is that civilians have a right not to be targeted in war, that means even if they are standing on top of the munitions factory, you may not do it. Right? They are trump cards. So people can say things like, there may well be an awful lot less pain in the world, a lot less suffering in the world, an awful lot less death in the world if we designate some people, some particularly poor and useless people, and kill them and harvest their organs. Probably true. It's probably true that there will be less pain and suffering and misery in the world if we just designated some people no one cares about and killed them and took their organs. If they have a right, it doesn't matter, because a right is a trump card. That's its place in debating. It is a response to the consequences may be better. To say there are issues of rights at stake is to say there are some things humans can and cannot do. Right? We cannot use child soldiers, even if it would make it easier to win the war. We cannot use human shields. We cannot target civilians or whatever, because there are certain things which, if you take them away from human beings, they are no longer human. And that's what it means to connect this stuff to human beings need this in order to live fulfilled, valuable lives, or human beings need this in order to be free.
But then shouldn't, like a further step of analysis, really to argue what does it mean to be human, right? Because what you're basically saying here is simply,
sometimes
the right to bodily integrity is simply an essential right, therefore everyone should have it, right? What's the step further in that analysis? And usually that step further is a practical analysis of whether the world's going to be a better place.
Well, if you're making an argument about bodily integrity being a right, it won't be about the world being a better place. It'll be about every human being needing their bodily integrity to be protected in order for them personally. So, not the world in general to be a better place, but for them personally to be recognised as humans at all. And the logic of the argument goes, if you think these people are people, you cannot believe that they should have this done to them, whatever the bodily integrity thing might be.
Why?
Well, abortion, say, or whatever, right? Like, if you genuinely believe the fetus is a person, you are not allowed to kill it, no matter how much harm there is to the mother. Is one. Or you can run the argument the other way around. If women have a right to self-defense, and it's a right, it does not matter how much harm there is to the fetus in killing it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I feel like I've kind of answered your question sort of elliptically. Have I hopelessly ran out of time and forgotten structure and all the rest of it? Do not follow these expedients in debating.
I'm looking at your dad and to the side.
You have 5 more minutes.
Right. Final important point, I'm going to pull rank here. I would in general stay away from arguments which assume biological differences between men and women, or even behavioural differences between men and women, for the simple reason that whether or not Israel is a feminist country, and whether or not debaters are in general feminists, the judging pool at Worlds and Euros is extremely feminist. And they will punish you. There are several judges who regard essentialist arguments, which is what these arguments are called, arguments which regard there as being essential differences between men and women, as simply unpersuasive because they are essentialist.
Certain judges who commented about the judging test at Worlds, perhaps?
I couldn't possibly comment any further on the identity of any of those judges. There was a hand at the back.
Yeah, so with the remaining 5 minutes, do you mind recapping, put in perspective when to talk about rights and how to talk about rights?
Well, we kind of forgot that, didn't we? All right, so, when to talk about rights? When you talk about rights is when you are rebutting a utilitarian or a consequentialist claim, right? That is the place they have in debating. So, when proposition goes, we should torture terrorists because overall they minimize harm. One of the things you might want to say is whether or not it will minimize harm is irrelevant here, because there are some things no government may do, and that includes torture. If you have a right not to be tortured, it doesn't matter whether the torture will minimize harm. Or we should criminalize drugs because it is harmful to everyone involved and it's a bad choice. And the opposition can respond whether or not it is harmful to everyone or not is irrelevant, and whether or not it is a bad choice, it is irrelevant, because they are their choices to make. And people have rights to decide what does and does not happen to their body. And you'll notice the first one of those, the torture example, was a fundamental interest right, and the second one was a choices right. But they are both ways of responding to claims about consequences. Yeah? So they're about showing that something is immoral even if the consequences are better. That's when it would be appropriate to talk about rights. They are trump cards. How to talk about rights? I've got quite a lot written about that down here, but broadly, we've run out. But
I have to go.
Very quickly, ways to make the arguments for rights. One, make a naked appeal to authority. There are some judges in the world who will buy it if you just cheat and go, look, we all recognise this is a right, see all these documents for details. Two, good old-fashioned libertarian rhetoric. There are plenty of judges in the world, Chris Bishop is one of them, who will find it persuasive if you just argue that states are nasty criminal organisations and they're not allowed to curb our freedom. Three, there are plenty of judges in the world who will accept you going, this is not a right strictly speaking, but enshrining the right has better consequences overall. So when people go, even if there is a hypothetical war where you should torture the terrorist, the point about torturing the terrorist is about the next war and the war after that and the war after that, and that's why we need an absolute prohibition. People have heard that kind of argument? Yes? No? Sometimes the argument is made that even though there could be one war where it would make sense to use chemical weapons, like if you break if you cross that mental boundary, if you make it that much easier, then like in 1,000 years the calculus of harm, even though you did win the first war, the next 1,000 years will be much worse if you cross that boundary for the first time. If you relax that prohibition once.
So in a sense, it's like act versus rule utilitarianism.
Absolutely, right? You can make that kind of defense of rights. If people don't know what act versus rules utilitarianism is, don't worry about it, although I could recommend a very good book for you. And the final thing you can do is the kind of stuff we were talking about towards the end, where you can go, recognizing this right is necessary for human beings either to have a valuable life or to be truly free. And those are both ways of saying recognizing that human beings have this right is the same thing as recognizing that these humans are humans at all. And that is why you're not allowed to do those things to them. And that is time.
Yeah.
Right.